Okay, picture the scene. It's a June morning in 1203. A whole fleet of Western knights, crusaders, sails out of the sea mist, and they see something that just doesn't seem real. Constantinople. We're talking a skyline of domes and golden roofs, stretching further than anything they could have possibly imagined back home. It looked like the city of God itself.
And this isn't some later exaggeration. One of the Crusades' own leaders, a guy named Geoffrey of Villard-Voin, he wrote that the sheer scale of it was so overwhelming it made even the bravest, most battle-hardened men just tremble. This wasn't just another city. To them, it was the center of the world, the true heir to the Roman Empire. And it was about to be lost forever. And right there, that's the core, tragic irony of this entire story. These men carried the cross on their shields. They truly believed they were on a holy war to reclaim Jerusalem. But their journey wasn't going to end there. It was going to end here, in the heart of Christendom itself, in an act of unbelievable betrayal. So let's back up. The Fourth Crusade, this was supposed to be a sacred mission, but somehow these knights found themselves not at the gates of Jerusalem, but at the walls of the single greatest Christian capital on earth, a city that held 1,000 years of history and art and knowledge in its walls. The end result was just absolute devastation, and not at the hands of some foreign enemy, but from their supposed brothers in faith. So how? How does a holy war go so catastrophically wrong? Well, the answer, like it so often is, comes down to a really bad mix of debt and desperation.
And this brings us right to the heart of the conflict. You see, this crusade wasn't undone by a huge battle or a brilliant enemy general. No, it was undone by a financial crisis that created the perfect storm for a deal that never, ever should have been made. I mean, it's a fair question, right? How was a holy war go bankrupt? Well, the Crusaders had basically gotten themselves stuck in Venice. They'd ordered this massive fleet, the biggest anyone had ever seen. But when the bill came due, they couldn't pay for it. The entire mission was dead in the water before it even started. And then, right into this mess, walks a key player, an exiled Byzantine prince named Alexios Angelos. He's desperate to get his hands on the throne in Constantinople, and he looks at this stranded army of elite warriors and sees his golden ticket. He comes to them with an offer that honestly must have sounded like it was sent from heaven. Just look at the scale of what he promised. It was staggering. He said, look, I'll solve every single one of your problems. He'd pay their enormous debt to Venice. He'd pay for the rest of their journey to the Holy Land. He'd even throw in 10,000 of his own Byzantine soldiers. And the real kicker? He promised to heal the great split between the Eastern and Western churches by submitting to the authority of the Pope. For the Crusaders, this was an absolutely irresistible deal. So they did it. They diverted the whole crusade, sailed to Constantinople, and put their guy on the throne. And the plan worked perfectly, right up until the moment Alexios threw open the doors to the imperial vaults and realized the empire he'd promised them was a ghost. The treasury was bone dry, completely empty. And this right here is where everything starts to spiral out of control. The prince had his crown, but it came at a price he literally couldn't pay, and his desperate attempts to find the money would end up tearing his own city apart from the inside.
That empty treasury set off a chain reaction, and it was a disaster. The new emperor, desperate for cash, did the one thing you should never do. He started stripping the city's ancient holy churches of their gold and silver relics. This act horrified the people of Constantinople. They saw it as the ultimate sin, and they rose up in a violent revolt that ended with their new emperor being overthrown and killed.
You can see the huge split this created in the city. To the emperor, melting down sacred icons was just a form of emergency taxation. He had a massive armed crusader army sitting outside his walls demanding payment. But to his people, it wasn't a tax. It was sacrilege. It was a betrayal of their god, their history, everything they held dear.
Okay, so let's just pause and think about where the Crusaders are now. Their puppet emperor is dead, their promised payment has completely vanished, and they still owe all that money to the Venetians. So they made a new plan, a decision that would shock the medieval world. If the city wasn't going to give them its wealth, they were just going to take it by force.
And this, tragically, leads to the climax of the Fourth Crusade. And this wasn't just another medieval siege. This was an attack by Christians on the very capital of their own civilization.
In April of 1204, the Crusaders breached the city's famous sea walls and just poured into the streets. You cannot overstate the shock of this moment. The defenders on those walls weren't facing an army from a different faith. They were facing men wearing the exact same cross on their shields.
And what happened next wasn't really a battle. It just wasn't. It quickly turned into something far, far uglier. For 3 straight days, the Crusader army engaged in a methodical, systematic plundering of the wealthiest city in the known world. It was a complete frenzy of greed and destruction. The Byzantine historian, a man named Nikitas Choniates, who actually lived through all this horror, he gave us this hauntingly simple summary. He said, "Great things were exchanged for small." He literally watched as priceless works of art, the heritage of 1,000 years of Roman civilization, were just melted down for the raw value of the metal they contained.
I mean, the cultural loss was just staggering. Ancient bronze statues from the age of the Roman emperors hacked apart, libraries full of irreplaceable texts burned, and in the most profound act of sacrilege imaginable, the Hagia Sophia, the very soul of Eastern Christianity, was profaned and utterly looted. This wasn't just destruction, this was the erasure of a civilization's memory.
Maybe the most famous symbol of this cultural theft is the 4 magnificent bronze horses that stood in the city's great hippodrome. They were so beautiful, so priceless, that they were actually spared from being melted down. Instead, they were carefully dismantled, shipped all the way back to Venice, and put on display, where they remain to this day, trophies of a conquest that should have never, ever happened.
So, what happens after the smoke clears? Well, the Crusaders had successfully destroyed the city, but they proved to be completely incapable of ruling it. They set up something they called the Latin Empire, but really, it was just a hollow kingdom built on a foundation of rubble and ruin. Their rule was an absolute disaster. The new Latin emperors were always broke. One of them, a man named Baldwin II, got so desperate for money, he had to sell the lead right off the palace roof for cash. And it gets worse. At one point, he literally pawned his own son to some Venetian merchants just to get a loan. By the time the Byzantines finally managed to take the city back in 1261, there was hardly anything left to rule. The descriptions from people who visited during this time are just heartbreaking. Constantinople, once known as the Queen of Cities, the envy of the world, was no longer a bustling metropolis. It had become a ghost town. Basically, a few small villages huddled together amidst the decaying ruins of its former magnificent glory.
And the damage was permanent. You see, the complex web of military, social, and economic systems that had allowed Constantinople to survive for nearly 1,000 years was shattered. The Fourth Crusade didn't just weaken the Byzantine Empire, it dealt it a mortal wound. It broke it from the inside, paving the way for its final fall to the Ottomans 2.5 centuries later.
And all this brings us to one final, really troubling question. The story of 1204 is a brutal reminder that the greatest threats to a civilization don't always come from the outside, from your declared enemies. Sometimes the most devastating wounds, the ones you can never recover from, are inflicted by the very people you thought were your allies, your protectors, your brothers in faith.